So if you've been watching any of my videos that I previously posted, you'll know that I've been working through all the different ways of using animations and using the armatures in Unity to do certain things within a game. And my plan was that I was going to do one last video on armatures using scaling of bones to control a mesh. And as I was working through that, it wasn't really working out the way I had hoped because scales are always used locally with their parent. As I was changing the parent scale, it would change all the child scales, and I really wasn't getting the results I wanted to do kind of a Jack and the Beanstalk vine expanding up the screen scenario. And as I did a little bit of digging, I discovered that you can do exactly what I wanted to do with armatures with shaders. And I really was planning on getting into shaders next anyway. And so I decided to forego any more armature videos and dig right into shaders. And shaders, if you've ever watched any videos on shaders, can be quite complicated and difficult to understand. And there's a bunch of concepts that are really hard to wrap your head around. And I'm not an expert on shaders by any means, and I am learning about them. And as I learn about all the nuances of shaders, I'll be making more of these videos. And we're going to start out very simple and straightforward. And you can do some really cool stuff even with very, very simple shaders. And so in this video, I am going to kind of make our first shader, go through those basic steps of creating a new shader and kind of what the elements of the shader are all about. And hopefully we can put together some things that are useful and create some cool effects, because really if you want to do any special effects in Unity, both with the particle system and shaders, you're going to really have to understand how to make your own shader to do exactly what you want. And matching up a cool looking shader with a particle system can really get some cool effects, or just using the shader in and of itself to do a special effect. So we're going to dive in and work on making our very first shader. So to start out, we're going to really create a extremely simple shader just to kind of go through what the steps are when creating a new shader. So I have a folder here called shaders. What I'm going to do is I'm going to right click, create shader, and then what I want to do is I want to go under universal pipeline, render pipeline, and select lit shader graph. Now remember, you have to have created a project with the universal render pipeline in order to get these options. So the shader graph is really only available under universal render pipeline, and also I'm going to be using glow effects here, and those are only available under universal render pipeline. So you won't see some of these options unless you've used that when creating a project. So I'm going to select lit shader graph, and I will name it simple glow shader. I'm going to double click on it to open it up. What we see here is our shader graph ready to be loaded up. Now we see two boxes here. One is the vertex and one is fragment. Now vertex, you can actually use shaders to manipulate your mesh. You can use it for scaling it, for doing all kinds of distortions on it in order to get a lot of cool effects, which we are not going to be using. So let's just drag this over here. We're going to be focusing on this fragment. And to start with, I'm going to do a couple things. We'll see this box over here. If I press the plus, what I can do is I can create inputs. Now, when you normally create a material, you see all kinds of inputs that you can affect that material. And the inputs you see come from the shader graph you select. By default, you may just have selected Simple Lit shader, which is one of the shaders that come with Unity. But in this case, we can create our own inputs that we want. And I'm going to create a color input. I'm going to name it base color. And I'm going to drag it over here onto our kind of a desktop area. And I can see my options over here. I see the name, I see a default, and I see a mode. And I'm going to want to select HDR because I'm going to want to add some brightness glowing. And let's just make the default white instead of black so we can see something. And I will click on this little circle that highlighted when my mouse went over it, and I'll drag it right onto base color. And now we see a preview here. And we see this little exposed checkbox. That means that I'll be able to see it in the inspector when I go to use this. I'm going to make a second item, and I'm just going to make it a float for now. And I'm going to call it intensity. We'll drag it down here, and I'm going to feed this into the emission. And I'm going to default that to 1. Actually, you know what? I don't want to make a... No, we can keep it a fixed value. So what I have is I have an emission, and I'm feeding 1 into it. But you'll notice this little 3. The emission actually wants a color. So by feeding a value into it, it'll basically make all the RGBs the same as the float I pass in. So we're just going to do that for now, and we're going to save this. And in order to use this, we're going to have to create a material out of it. So I'm going to go into material, create, where's that material? And I'm going to call it glow shader material. Oops, let's do that. There we go. And now right up here for my shader, you'll notice it defaults to this universal render pipeline lit. And if we go under shader graphs, we can see my simple glow shader, and we can see my base color was exposed. Let's choose red. And my intensity, my number, was also exposed. So let's just leave it at 1. And now what we can do, I'm just going to drag this. Actually, I don't want it there. I want it there. I want it as a separate window next to, there we go. This is what I want. We're going to shrink that. So you'll notice I have a sphere here, and it's currently assigned just some default material. And I am going to go in and change the material from this white material. And I am going to, you know what? I'm just going to drag this right onto that guy like that. It's the easiest way to get that material on. And now what you'll see, I'm just going to select this, is we can see our sphere now is glowing white because we have basically this intensity is just feeding the same value in for the RGB. So the reason I'm doing this is I can show you what happens. So we have a material that's assigned to our shader, and the material is assigned to our sphere. So what we can do is as we change our shader, we can see the end result change on our sphere, which is really what we want. So I've kind of set this up so we can see how to just hook everything up and get it assigned to an element on our scene so we can see the results of what we're doing. So I'm going to actually delete this, and I'm going to delete that, and I'm going to create a new color. Let's call it emission color. Let's drag it down here. Let's make sure it's exposed. Yep. So it's an HDR. We will default it to red. And now let's hook it up to our emission. And as soon as we save this, we see that as soon as I hit that save asset, our glow color changed to red. And if I open up my glow shader material, which I've misspelled there, we can see our emission color now shows up and our base color shows up. And I can change this, and if I change this to purple, you can see my glow change to purple. Now what we're going to do is add one more item, and we are going to make a float, and we are going to call it intensity, because we're going to use this to actually change how bright our emission is going to be. And what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to delete this. And what I want to do is I want to multiply my color by the intensity. So I'm going to create node, and I want a math node this time, basic, multiply. Now what I'm going to do is multiply my color times my intensity, so it'll just make the color that much brighter by doing this and feeding that into my emission. Now make sure that's exposed. Now I can save the asset, and what I can do is, you'll notice this mode, I can make it a slider, and I'm going to make it a slider between, say, 0 and let's say 5. Makes it easy to edit that way in our inspector over there. So now let's save this asset. So you'll see that our glow went away. We just left the red sphere because that's our base color. And we can see our intensity. Now we have a slider and it defaulted to 0. So I can grab that slider. You'll notice that as I slide it up and down, see, our sphere gets brighter and less bright as we change our intensity. So what I've shown is that we just have a very simple glow shader that I can assign my base color and emission color, which really is no different than a standard lit shader. I can also pick an emission color and base color. But I can't adjust the intensity outside. And yeah, this isn't really that useful, but it has shown us how to kind of set up all of our shader and understand how to assign it to a material and get that material on a sphere and kind of set up our working situation to be able to work on more fancy shaders. And I'm just going to take my mouse wheel. You can zoom this in and out with your mouse wheel because a lot of shader graphs can get pretty big and complicated. So next what we're going to do is we are going to make a little fancier shader. What we want to do is make a shader like a pulse glow shader. Maybe that my glow pulses in and out, right, as it's sitting there. And you don't have to do that through code. You don't have to do that through some other means. A shader can actually do all of this work for us. So that's the next thing we're going to tackle. All right, so what we're going to want to do is I want to keep this shader, but I want to make a new shader. And I don't want to make one and have to get all this hooked up again. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in here and I'm going to duplicate this shader. And I can do that through highlighting it and pressing Control D. Why they don't put it on a menu, and maybe it is, I've never been able to find it, but it is an easy way of duplicating any object in our project tree. And I'm going to hit F2, which of course is the universal rename, and I'm going to call it Pulse Glow Shader. So we want it to kind of pulse in and out. And again, not super complicated, but it will show how to add a bit of fanciness to a different shader. So I'm gonna double click on that. Yep, that's still my simple glow shader. Pulse Glow Shader. I'm gonna zoom out a bit. So what I want to do is, we've seen how we can affect how much it glows through feeding in a value into our emission. And so I'm going to keep my emission color, but instead of multiplying it by a fixed value, I'm going to want to multiply it by a value that's changing over time. So let's delete this. Now it's our simple color again. And what we're going to do is I'm going to drag this over. I'm going to create a node, and I'll just type in time. It's one of the easiest way to get it. I'm going to create a time node. So what time node is going to do is just start counting time from the time you press play. So it's just going to be a number that's going to increase. It's going to be 1 after 1 second, 2 after 2 seconds, and so on. So we want to pulse it up and down. So what type of math function will go, say, between 0 and 1? So what I want to do is I want to use a sine wave. So there's a sine function, and I can feed in my time into my input. And so if you think of what a sine wave does, is at 0, it's going to be 0. At pi over 2, it's going to be 1. At pi, it's going to be 0 again. At 3 pi and a half, it's going to be negative 1. And then at 2 pi, it's going to go back to 0. And then it's just going to repeat. Right? It's a wave up and down. And we can see that it's showing us this color. It's going up and down as the time is going up and down. Our output is going to go between white, which is 1, and anything 0 or below is going to be black. So negative numbers are black. So now if we take this and feed it into our multiplier, right? Basically now we can see our color is pulsing up and down. And if we save our asset, but remember our shader is right now still that simple glow shader. So let's go into our glow shader material, and we are going to go back to our shader graphs, and we're going to assign it to Pulse Glow Shader. And now we can see that our item is pulsing up and down. Pretty simple. Now maybe it's going dark, and we really never want it to go dark. Maybe we want to offset that so it never gets below a certain value. We don't want it to go to 0 or negative. So what we're going to do is we are going to take our output of sine, let's delete this, and we want to shift it up. So we'll create another new math node, and we want to do a basic add. So we're going to add the output, right, which is going to be between -1 and 1, and we are going to add just a fixed value, which is going to be, if we do 1, it'll now go between 0 and 2. And so if we do, say, 1.3, it is now going to go between 0.3 and 2.3, right? So we'll feed that into here. Now we'll hit save. Sometimes you need to move your cursor into that scene window before it will update. So now we can see it's pulsing in and out. So it's pulsing between a 0.3 value and a 2.3. So now that's great, but it's going a little slow. So maybe I want to be able to adjust how fast it pulses in and out. And so in that case, what I can do is I can take my time value and I can multiply it. So the time is changing, it's going faster, right? So we want to create a node. We can click this basic multiply, or I could have just started typing multiply. So we're going to multiply this by a value, and it defaults to 2. But I want the user, whoever's using my shader, hook that up, I want them to be able to select how fast I want to pulse it. So I'm going to create another node, another float, and I'll call it pulse speed. Now we're not really using that intensity anymore, so I could go up here and I could just remove that. All right, so let's drag the pulse speed down here. It's going to be exposed. Let's default it to 1. Let's multiply that to there. So let's save that asset. Let's go into our glow shader material again. And now we have our pulse speed. Yep. Let's make this, let's make it a slider again. I like those. Those are easy. And let's go between, let's say 0.5 and 10. Let's see what that does for us. So we have our slider. So let's go into here. You can see that's going pretty slow. So let's speed it up. Not bad. So now we have a shader that we can pulse between and at some speed. You know, it's going between 0.3 and I don't really, it seems a little, still a little not intense enough. So let's change this value to 1.8. Let's save that. Let's see what that does. Yeah, I like that a little better. Obviously, you can play around with these values, but so we've shown is that through a simple sine wave, we can pulse things in and out. Remember, really, everything we're dealing with is numbers between 0 and 1. And then we're going to be manipulating those, maybe multiplying it, subtracting it, inverting it, all kinds of different math functions to kind of get at what we want. Sine waves are used a lot in graphics because they go between, -1 and 1. They stay within that range, and just by offsetting or multiplying, you can change the frequency of the wave and the amplitude of the wave and the offset of the wave to really achieve what outputs you want, and it gives kind of a nice effect. So that gives us a nice pulse. So the last thing we're going to do is maybe make something that's a bit more erratic. So let's work on that next. All right, so what we're going to do next is we're going to go back to our simple glow shader. We are going to hit Control D to duplicate that again. And we're going to name this one, it's going to be something like, let's call it, let's hit F12, call it Random Glow Shader. All right, let's double click on that guy. So here's our basic glow shader again. So now what we're going to want to do is we're going to get rid of this intensity again. And instead of a sine wave, we're going to want to make something that kind of jiggers up and down in a very erratic fashion. And so anytime you want something that's a bit more random, what we do is we'll create a noise mode. It's pretty common. And you'll see we have an option. We can do gradient noise, simple noise, or sine noise, sine wave. I'm just going to use a simple noise. And what I have is, this is a noise pattern. So it's just going to be a bunch of zeros and ones. And what I'm going to want to do is this value affects, see if I type in 1, if I type in 30, you'll notice that the lower the number goes, the less dense or the more generalized the noise gets. So it's changing values slower the lower the number is here. And so I'm going to want to let the user control that. So let's create a float here. Or actually, no, we can just go in and rename this intensity to, let's say call it change rate. The rate by which our flashes change. And I'm going to feed that into here. And I'm going to, again, make it a slider. Oops, it's already a slider. Let's make it a minimum of 20 and a maximum of, say, 200. All right, and what we're going to want to feed in here is, this is kind of the seed. We're going to want to make another time node. We're going to feed the time into this top value. And you notice, you'll see what happens as soon as we do that is that our value is kind of flashing randomly because it keeps picking a new set of random numbers based on the time that's being fed in. And the time's always changing. And so this is always changing. So if we feed that into our intensity, we can see that is changing randomly. And if we go back to our glow shader material and instead we pick universal pipeline, oops, I didn't want that. I wanted shader graphs, random glow shader. And now when we come over here, let's save this. All right, so I kind of figured out for some reason I had to rerun this and rebuild it, which didn't seem to be required before, but for whatever reason, based on that change, that's what I had to do. All right, so it's flashing rather quickly. If I maybe slow it down, maybe my values are a bit too big for our change rate. So let's go in. Let's do a minimum of, say, 2, maximum of, say, 50. All right. But one issue is that it's not very bright, right? So really we want it more intense than that. So I'm feeding my simple noise directly into my multiplier. So I think we are going to want to make another float, and I think we do need an intensity value here. So let's make that a slider and go between 1 and 10 again. So let's hook that up to a multiply mode. Math, basic multiply. Instead of feeding that into there, let's feed this into my multiply. Stick that guy there. Let's stick this guy there. Let's save him. And we can go over here and we can, there we go, change the intensity. All right, So now we kind of have our kind of flashing randomly. And so why would we want to do this? Why would we want a randomly flashing particle? Well, sometimes when you're making a particle stream, first of all, using glow in particles is very useful. If you want to see where I've done a simple, another simple shader, and with a particle, I made a video last year called "Why Doesn't My Stuff Glow?" because I was always frustrated that I would follow videos and they'd look so cool, and I didn't know much about universal render pipelines or any of the global. You need to set up this global volume here to make it glow. If you want to see how to do all that setup stuff, you can go to that video. I'll post the link in the description because a bunch of stuff is necessary in order to support this glow pattern. In addition, one thing I'll notice that this post-processing on your camera needs to be checked. Otherwise, it will show up in your scene, but not in your game. And that was another thing that frustrated me. But like I said, I go over all those details in that. If your screen isn't looking like what mine is, go through that video to see maybe on some defaults or some details on setting up your global volume and making sure everything's set up in order to see your glow pattern. So here's a little preview of what that's going to look like. See, we can see our little sparks coming out. We're using our glow pattern. But you're going to have to wait till my next video because putting together these particles, there's a lot to it. And I want to kind of take it in a step-by-step fashion because a lot of the videos go really fast through this stuff and it's kind of hard to follow. And I want to take my time. So you're going to have to wait till my next video. We're going to take our shaders and put them together with the particle system and make our little sparking arcs. So stay tuned and follow my next video. Thanks for watching.